So the war is still going on, and we've got some Union officers who are really trying to figure out ways to get one up on the Confederacy, to outsmart them. So the Union officer, Scott, he was in charge. He commanded the Union Army. And he came up with, it's called the Anaconda plan. Think an anaconda is like a really big snake. He wanted to snake around the whole Confederacy. There's a map and an image in the lesson where you can see what I'm talking about. And he wanted to cut off the Confederacy from getting any supplies. So he wanted to have them completely surrounded, and he thought, well, if we can do that, that'll help us. That'll give us an advantage. So he also wanted he wanted the Navy to set up a blockade. He wanted to block their access to the sea, so then they couldn't get anything in. He wanted to kind of cut off their resources, and if he could cut off their resources, then they wouldn't be able to get anything in. They would be easier to defeat. So after Scott retired, he was really old. He couldn't even go out into battle. He just kind of he did all the planning behind the scenes. And after he retired, George McClellan is who President Lincoln appointed to command the Union Army. So he was taking over, it's called the theater. He was taking over the Eastern Theater, like the big part, a big area where a lot of the battles were happening and a lot of the wartime things were going on. So McClellan was in charge. Now McClellan, he was a little bit nervous. He could think out really good plans. He could come up with really good ideas of how to attack and defeat the Confederate Army. But he was always kind of standing back. He was really reserved. He didn't want to make a move, and that cost him a lot of times. So the plan was that the Union was going to capture, they were going to conquer the Confederate capital of Richmond. So that was the plan, but McClellan was just really nervous. So he trained a lot of soldiers. He had a lot of good ideas, but he kind of always missed out on his opportunity to put them into play. And when he finally got close, when he finally started moving in on the Confederate, well, they had Stonewall Jackson, and he pushed them right back out. So we know McClellan, he's really nervous, he's cautious, and then he's the Union commander. The Confederate commander, Robert Lee, he's not cautious. He goes for it. So during that summer, the summer of 1862, the Confederates, they beat the Union in several different battles. So then the Confederates under Lee, they were going to invade Maryland. And so they were going to beat Maryland, or they were going to Maryland. They were going to try and convince them to join the Confederacy. Well, McClellan was dealt a nice little hand here because Lee had this big, elaborate plan worked out. He was going to split his army. They were going to go two different ways. Well, he had drawn up all of his battle plans on a cigar wrapper, and somebody in McClellan's army found it and brought it back to McClellan. So now he knew exactly what Lee was planning, exactly where Lee's troops were going to be. It should have been a really good opportunity for McClellan to stop the Confederacy and have a pretty easy defeat. Well, we know about Mr. McClellan. He's a little nervous. He holds back in his caution, and he hesitated, which ended up not letting the Union be as successful, because he was trying. McClellan ideally was going to catch them when they were separated, but by the time he finally decided to make a move, the Confederate Army had come back together. And so they ended up meeting at Antietam, Maryland, and it was the biggest one-day loss of life in the whole war. So in one day of fighting, over 23,000 men from the Union and the Confederacy had been killed. And so Lee and the Confederate Army, they ended up retreating. And President Lincoln was so frustrated with McClellan because, he felt like the war could have been over. There could have been several turning points, and McClellan had held back and hadn't acted quick enough. So he went to the battlefield to see McClellan, and he ordered McClellan to go after Lee, go take care of it. Well, we know McClellan did not do that quickly. So Lincoln, he replaced him. And so he replaced him. Since Lee retreated, the Union declared the victory at Antietam, and Lincoln had been waiting for a really strong, clear-cut victory to make any announcements, but he took that one and decided that was a good enough victory for him, and that is when he issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And so the Emancipation Proclamation said that slaves in any areas of rebellion to the United States, so remember, the Confederacy, they had seceded from the Union, so they were considered rebels to the United States. Any slaves in those areas were forever free. So with this Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln had just freed the slaves in the Confederacy.